Hello, Nick Smoot here, and I am happy that you're watching this YouTube channel. Today I'm interviewing an incredible person, Tim Chang. He's a gardener, farmer now, but he's also one of the best venture capitalists out there. He is super involved in Burning Man. He is also somebody who is compassionately connected to average humans and advanced technology at the same time, and lives in the Bay Area, but also now has bought some property on the coast to build this cool, like, community-driven farm. I like Tim. He's weird in the best way and cares a lot about people. He's in a band. He's all these things. And I love our discussion because it explores systems, capitalism, better methods of how do we create value exchange. And coming from someone who's one of the top tier venture capitalists, super important conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. You'll notice I'm in the maker space for a lot of the art that comes to Burning Man from the Generator. And the Generator is this cool space in Nevada. That's where I was doing the interview. Tim was on Zoom. You may hear some stuff in the background, but I travel across the country and work with different collectives that we're deploying with governments and real estate developers and big brands to help average people build really amazing companies. And it's a fun company that we've built that we are truly getting to get out there and change the future of innovation by making it a grassroots, community-driven effort. So if we're in your community, I hope I see you soon. I'll be in New York, Florida, Nevada, and Idaho for a festival series over 3 days, flying around. Coming up, Think Big Festival. It is, if you want to check it out, thinkbigfestival.com. It's one of the Innovation Collective's signature events. Each town has a different industry vertical that the community creates for, and so the festival is experts from those verticals being involved. Good example, our community in Florida is focused on the future of longevity, meaning health, and how do you have like the most abundant, awesome life, especially because we've done great as a country to extend death, but it's time that we extend life. And this town is going to be the future of innovation around that. Someone like Chip Connolly, who was a key member at growing and scaling Airbnb, one of their executives, he is speaking. He has now founded the Midlife Wisdom School, the Modern Elder Academy. He is an awesome human being who thinks deeply about what it means to live an abundant life. He is a philosopher, entrepreneur through and through. Pumped to have Chip at our event coming up. If you don't know who he is, look up Tim Ferriss podcasts, Chip Connolly, and have your mind blown. He's a great speaker, great thinker. $15 for our tickets gets you 3 days of content all across the country. And if you're in one of the communities, a part of our leadership community, you can come to a small studio audience gathering. I'm gonna shut up now and let us get to the whole interview with Tim Chang, incredible venture capitalist, gardener, farmer, musician, burner, great human being, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey, and welcome today. I am here with Tim Chang, who is my honored guest and not only great venture capitalist, like I shared, but a really great human being. So thank you for making time today, Tim.
Thanks for having me on. It's such a pleasure, Nick. I always appreciate the chance to chat with you.
Yeah, and you know, Tim, you know, to give some of my experience with Tim, he is this weird dichotomy of understanding where markets are going in innovation and venture capital meets he feels so deeply about community and intentionality, and that is an incredible cocktail of a you know, a human being in San Francisco, because you have people who give it lip service, but you know, the community side, but Tim doesn't give it lip service. I mean, you live it. So I'm hoping today we can have this deeper discussion. To start though, give a little backstory on you, just kind of like where you grew up and maybe how you ended up in San Francisco, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. I've always kind of been the roaming outsider, honestly. I'm the product of Asian tiger parents. They were immigrants, you know, doing their PhD. So first housing was, you know, college, graduate school dorms. Don't actually think I was an intentionally planned kid, to be honest. And so, you know, while my father was moving around a lot for tenureship, we moved in a lot of towns from California to Long Island, even a stint in Taipei before settling in Michigan. So I grew up in Michigan, first in Michigan State, academic town. Then my mom got a job as an engineer. So we moved to a small town called Brighton, which was, you know, kind of a bedroom community, predominantly white. And so growing up there was pretty formative for me. It was like skateboarding and heavy metal guitar and, that sort of thing. I did my best to fit in. I was one of, two Asian kids kind of in the whole high school of several hundred kids.
Wow.
It was kind of tough. I'd go to Chinese school on Saturdays as well to get the cultural element. But always feeling a little bit like that outsider, I was into stuff that my parents didn't think was normal for Asian kids, like punk music and electric guitar and all that kind of stuff. So it was always a bit of a black sheep there, and I didn't always fit the perfect nerdy bookworm image too of Asian Americans. I went to the University of Michigan to study engineering, but it was a miracle I graduated because all my time was spent playing music and doing theater and all this other stuff. So.
Great.
I feel like I've always been a weird eclectic mix of interests that didn't seem to naturally fit together, and always had that tension of like, I don't know, I do left brain stuff for a living, but I feel more like a right brain person, but I feel like I shouldn't talk about these things to each other because it reduces my credibility. And I carried that, kind of awkwardness and tension for decades until I think into my 30s. I just got exhausted from it. So, you know what, I just didn't know who I am, and started integrating that, and would even mention in, say, business meetings like, oh yeah, I went to Burning Man, changed my life. And I thought I would get a lot of pushback or, kind of like criticism for it. But what I found is just that authenticity of integrating it was really well received. And by taking a chance to just being more authentic all around, kind of like being willing to speak about businessy or left brain things with my creative friends, they appreciated it. And then speaking about the more creative and edgy and out there things with business friends who I thought were more straight laced, they appreciated it. And so the lesson there was, be yourself, especially if it means tying together what you think are eclectic or really heterogeneous interests that don't seem like they would come together, because that's actually where innovation lies. That really is your life as a mixtape. And that, to me, is where innovation happens. Each of us has a weird collection of interests that might not naturally fit, or someone else hasn't thought to combine together. And you might just make peanut butter and chocolate go together in something that's uniquely you,
Totally. No, I love what you're saying there because, as I look at, there's this quote that I stumbled across recently. It talks about from flint and steel to self-driving cars. There's this like soupy thing about curiosity. Like that's this driver. And when you start to look at curiosity, I've found that in building communities across the country, the most magical thing is that if you can build community around shared curiosity, it gives everyone equal ground to stand on, and it draws out, it's a shared currency that everyone has in abundance, but they kind of hide. And when they start to bring it out, it gets rid of preference, bias, all these things that you kind of bring to the table because your curiosity is just as awesome as mine. And it starts to make this beautiful mashup like you're talking about of this, that's where the really creative, beautiful thing lies, is when opposite brains mash together. And speaking of you talked about music and being an Asian kid growing up in Michigan. Still playing music? Don't play music? And if so, what do you play?
Definitely still playing music. I have 3 or 4 little musical projects. So it's everything from top 40 straight ahead, the 80s,
Awesome.
but to like prog rock. I've got a group that I'm working with now. We're like playing Tool songs and trying to get down crazy polyrhythms, and so it's like as geeky as that, right? So
did you say prog rock?
Yeah, math rock, nerd rock, and that kind of stuff.
I love it.
So it's like fun things like that. But yeah, it's a really key outlet for me, and I really pursued it professionally earlier on and found it was really hard, to make a living under the traditional system. And I got close. I had a band that had this development deal offer from a record label. And when I read the business terms, I was like, this is terrible. This is like indentured servitude. That kind of inspired me to kind of give up that dream of professional musicianship to go back to business school and learn about business, learn how to read contracts, that kind of stuff, and kind of understand more how it worked from that side. And then that was an interesting doorway for me to think about, what if you change the business models of how you do something that you love? And I realize that can be a privilege to do that. Sometimes you really do have to be a starving musician to make it work. But I thought, what if you don't have to starve? What if there was a way to do what you love, but under your terms, but maybe with a different business model? And that was that notion of like, if you can divorce the way you make income from what it is that your life's work is, that leads to some
Yep.
interesting new dimensions as well,
Totally. Well, and you're touching on something that I can't help but obsessively believe is that if I look back on my life and when I've done this exercise with other people, you look for this weird thread that kind of runs from like weird formative childhood imprinting, and then like kind of bleeds into first job, like how you did your first job, your strengths and weaknesses, education paths, career paths, books you love to read. And you start to see that there's this mix, that it's who you are. It's like authentic you. And when you wrap that around a mission that you hold on to and never let go, while you find other ways to make the money, like stay afloat, that's this beautiful, space. And I personally think the most magical time to explore that thread is in community. Because like when you do it alone, it's like, it's kind of cool. And the internet gave us really interesting like online communities with shared curiosity. But now it's like, how do you find the real humans, I think, is becoming a bigger question too right now.
Totally. Yeah, you're right. Community is the ultimate mixtape. And what you want is actually a collection of like wildly, vastly different mutants of different flavors.
Mm-hmm.
And in that magic creates this wonderful concoction, right? It's like a Cambrian soup of like unique interests. Even in network theory, the value of a network is directly correlated to the heterogeneity of it, the variety of it. If you've got a bunch of people who have the same knowledge, they probably know the same people, the same things, that doesn't generate this sort of like synergistic magic as much as like people from radically different walks of life who kind of figured out their superpower in those fields.
So you as a venture capitalist, right? Like, and I apologize if you hear like beeping, I'm in the generator.
Love it.
Which, for those who don't know what the generator is, it ties directly into this whole discussion. And I was here visiting it anyways because it's a part of a bigger just a bigger thing that we're exploring in Nevada. But there's like forklift and people moving things around because this is where they make a lot of the art for Burning Man. Mm-hmm. So it's a giant 40,000 square foot makerspace. But speaking of the mashup of people and cities, as a venture capitalist, you're kind of talking about echo chamber. Yeah. Do you find groupthink happening in some of the major metros right now, and you're going outside of those to find interesting deals? Or how do you find that space where odd individuals like mash together and make something magical? Like, how do you do that as a venture capitalist right now?
It's a tough one. Okay, so I guess we should chat about sort of pre-COVID thinking and then post.
Sure.
At Mayfield, we pretty much almost had this informal policy. It was like, we pretty much don't do deals out of the Bay Area unless it's something really special and we know the people from before. And that's because prior to COVID, the thinking was, this is where all the best people end up, birds of a feather, flock together. Like, you won't be able to build a team and scale it unless you're in San Francisco, because that's where all the talent is coalesced, the universities, etc. But I think COVID makes that not as valid and rock solid an assumption. Yes, there'll be still a lot of talent here, but if you look at inventory in San Francisco real estate, it's skyrocketing because people are doing a diaspora away. They're going to East Bay, they're going to Marin, they're going out of state, they're going overseas, because COVID allows you to not just work from home, but work from anywhere. And if you can do that, and if it's okay not to go to the office and distributed work is the new norm, why would you necessarily just stay in SF, let alone the Bay Area, let alone California, right? And so that I want to see that, because over concentration of too much quality in one place, also geographically, leads to a lot of inequality. It's why SF real estate was bonkers. We want this to go back to small towns like Coeur d'Alene or wherever else to rejuvenate, regenerate that talent throughout the system.
Yeah, and how do you, speaking of kind of like this, you used a phrase at one point that I thought was awesome called urban composting. And we were talking about just rethinking real estate in urban and suburban settings. And you and I are both really big fans of, the industry term, which is so boring, is adaptive reuse. Right. I like urban composting. It's better. But that thinking of urban composting leads to something else that you're very intentional about. So let's try and answer it in two parts. One, community. Like, how do you think it, if you had a theory about getting people to mash up with each other, because you see it at Burning Man, you have it happen in your personal life, you see certain deals where they mash up perfect. How would you curate that, not in like a scary, like Tim is pulling the strings of society, but is there a formula that you've been starting to see that just feels authentic and raw that you want to implement in your life? And what kind of projects are you starting to look at
For
to
sure.
try and create community that's healthy and interesting?
Yeah. Disclaimer, I'm still a newbie at this despite years of wanting to curate tribal gatherings, put together tribes of different people, different flocks. I think it takes intentional curation and seeding of that community. Otherwise, the default is you pick your buddies or people who look like you, and then really you just kind of get a groupthink clicks. And that's the normal thing, even with intentional communities like, oh, from the woke spiritual former tech burner community, we all look alike and we're mostly white and affluent and we'll get together and buy some land and do our thing, right? And do sound healings all day. Like that's the normal thing, but to really have community that spans and maybe heals this inequality, we got to figure out how to do, diversity and inclusivity in a real way. And the problem is even now we have this pressure for diversity and inclusion, but it's still performative. It's like, got my token BIPOC person done,
Right. Right.
And what's hard about this inclusivity is like, it's like so-and-so knows a BIPOC person, let's invite them. And that's really different than building true friendships and true relationships with folks, because, if you are getting that invite, you can smell it. It's like, you just
It's
want me to be there
transactional.
yeah, you just want me to
Yep.
check your box for you, dude. And
Yep.
so it takes groundwork to build that. It takes strong intention. Something I've tried to do, even in my own network, I was always kind of an introvert, not really good at like networking before. So I had to put a lot of thought into it. I used to make spreadsheets of like, if I had a really interesting collection of friends, I would want somebody from hospitality industry and somebody from this area and somebody who's an artist. And I would literally map that stuff out and then like work for years to try to build friendships with those folks. And then what I wanted to do was just be the switchboard between them. And so I'd use a lot of things like my birthday gathering literally to play show and tell of people I just really admired. And my theory was like, if I love them, you guys will too. And it really worked. And I found that the more variance there was in the types of people, the more interesting ensuing magic occurred. And so
Yeah.
that was my form of like trying to seed community, based initially on the energy. The energy was, are these giving people? Are they brilliant? Are they curious? Back to your curiosity point, in their own fields. And the anchoring energy, I think, was the curiosity part, but also the giving part. And the giving part, I could always sense of, are they a taker or a giver? Usually, by when you meet someone, you can kind of get a sense, are they in it for themselves? Or are they curious about you and asking, what can I do for you? And what I found is I tend to gravitate towards people who have that same energy. And that's kind of this weird glue that makes it work. Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. It totally does. I apologize. There's even more sound now, so I was kind of
Yeah,
going
no
on and
worries.
off mute.
Yeah.
But no, so that giving mentality, I love that because you're probably aware of Techstars. It's like you have like Y Combinator, which is the Harvard
Yeah.
of that, and then you've got Techstars, which is like this really cool. I feel like it's like the Montessori school version that's like spread out across the country, a little more community driven. However, both put out great results. And one of the things I have just like begged, borrowed, and stole from Mark Solon, who is with Techstars, and Mark would pound this into my head. He's been a mentor for years. And he said, give first, hashtag give first. And it's like this thing they have. And what's really interesting, what you were mentioning is, curiosity and a giving spirit. What I found, because with, a little bit about Innovation Collective, but, we're now having governments and foundations and people saying, we're going to basically buy your team and your system, and you're going to hire teams of people. And we want you to turn our town into curious people who give first and build healthy economies. And the give first thing, what I find interesting, and curiosity both, I believe they both sit inside of people, but because of pain, they hide them. And so pain, like hurt people. Like at some point they were super curious about something. And we probably remember like as a kid, when you had that moment where you like showed your friends something, they made fun of you. And it might've been a physical item, or like, it might've been like a brain item where you said something and people like, that doesn't make any sense. And you're like, oh, okay, I'll never damn say that again or anything like it. And it's like, zoom. down goes my curiosity.
Right.
And then give first, like that giving attitude. It's like you give and give and give, and at some point you get screwed too often.
Yeah.
And what people forget is, how do I still be generous, but also be generous with myself too? Like, I got to give into me. I just have nothing to give. And it's sad when you see somebody who's like a taker or just greedy, and it's as if they've forgotten that it's okay to go hang out. Like, relax. No, it's so true what you're saying about that curiosity and giving. I love that, Tim.
Yeah.
How are you, when you look at your venture portfolio, because as a venture capitalist with Mayfield, how do you try and nurture that in the founders that you work with? And at Mayfield, do you guys have kind of like an approach to this authentic generosity and authentic curiosity? Because I can only imagine it makes better founders, better companies, better returns if it's done right.
It does. Our tagline at Mayfield is people first, and we're trying really hard to keep refining what that means and live it, so it's not just a fortune cookie thing. But it really does start with the founders, what their motivation really is. Is it what you're trying to get rich? You're trying to get famous? Often I find that there are these core motivations, and a lot of times they're informed by trauma, core wounds. A lot of what we do is compensating for that, right? There's that saying, we are most passionate about that which we are denied growing up, right? And so, there's these templates for why people do things and build things. And the startups they build are often an extension of their inner energy. And so, a lot of coaching out there is really talking about the true work of what you do ain't even the products or startups or companies. It stems from the work within, because there's this saying that as within, so expressed without. And your energy you bring to anything you do transmits into the energy you carry with your immediate team, your co-founders, even to customers. Company culture doesn't happen by accident. It is an extension of the founder's energy. And so trying to read energy of people, as woo as that sounds, is really critical. And part of that, reading that energy, is triangulating. Do you know your core wound? Why are you building this? Like, what is success to you? Is it legacy? Is it fame? Is it fortune? Which of these is it? How self-aware are you? Do you know your blind spots? Are you secure in naming those? Could you hire people who are not just yes people? Are you okay with even replacing yourself someday if it's better for the company? It's all those things that sometimes you can only get by taking walks with people, or like letting people let down their guard outside of the stuffy boardroom setting.
Yeah. And that's hard to do, because I think, I grew up always thinking business was so, transactional, and it's just, it's arbitrage, right? And it still is, like, in some weird ways. Like, I know a lot of people in business. Like, I think one of the most obvious moments of the arbitrage army was PPE. With everybody and their mother who came up, and all of a sudden they're like, yo, we're going to raise capital, like arbitrage masks. Yo, we're going to raise capital to get like tests in the country. But we're going to sell them at a premium. We're going to be more ethical than the other guys. And it was like, everybody all of a sudden was selling masks and PPE. And it's scary, because I think that comes from that place of a wound of greed and fear, and they want more. But you do have to ask, like, at scale, I love what you're saying, and it's beautiful. And how do you nurture that in, your world right now? Like, without naming the project, are you able to talk a little bit about some of your thinking? Because currently you reside in Palo Alto, correct?
Actually, Mill Valley, just north of the
Mill
city.
Valley.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up.
But I'm intrigued, because it's something very tangible you're doing to push this narrative farther, which as a VC is intriguing to me. So talk a little bit about that.
For sure. Candidly, Nick, this was informed by Burning Man. Burning Man really changed my life, seeing how good people can be when there's not necessarily money in exchange for goods or services, when creativity is unbridled, and when you can literally be like the most awesome version of your 10-year-old self. But that spurred this notion towards community and finding your own superpowers and radical self-expression and authenticity. And many of us from that started thinking about, like, we should all live together. We should have permanent Burning Man camp things, and live in a commune. That's always been the joke. We should build a next gen commune. What kind of COVID really pushed me on was maybe the download is to do that, return to nature, return to living in community, return to connection with where our food comes from, where our energy comes from, with each other. So there's this notion of resilience, and also maybe the shift away from just technological convenience for convenience and profit's sake. I am a personal believer much of COVID has come about because of the business models and the economic structures we use within capitalism. Those pressures on industrial livestock farming, and how we keep producing everything at scale, and we're addicted to the church of endless growth, and the impacts that has on the planet, on ourselves, our mental health, our community, our inclusivity. All of those are coming out to play now. And so I've been looking at buying property, kind of in this outside Bay Area, to play with this, make it a sandbox for things like steward ownership, and maybe try to embody permaculture principles, play with community. My dream is create eco little guest houses, and find people for residency fellowship programs. I have this curiosity. If you were an innovator in your field, let's say you're a teacher trying to do something really cool with this era of Zoom teaching or something, what would it mean to you if you didn't have to worry about housing and food and community and mentorship and support for a year or two? What awesomeness could you do? So I have a dream to offer residency fellowship programs like that: teacher in residence, healer in residence, gardener in residence. Just
you have these humans in residence, like they're HIRs instead of the EIR, right? It's the entrepreneur in residence model, flipped, where you're looking at just a holistic human. Like, gosh, that's so cool.
And with service and innovation, as opposed to, I'm not trying to incubate companies. It's more like, are you looking to, kind of innovate in your field as a service to humanity and community,
Which I think is, it's equally as important. When you look at something like a Burning Man, you realize the question is, so like, let's look at the 80s, right? Like the 60s, 70s, you have all these moments of like globalization, NAFTA, then the internet, then shipping, then planes, and all this stuff exploding that changed the game. And in the American dream, what I find a trip is the American dream was a shared global dream that then got spun on its head into a marketing dream to create insecurity and drive us into this whole like ecosystem more, which I get it. Like, it helped us blow through the hierarchy of needs. And sure, we have paved roads and we have electricity everywhere. There's some cool shit we got out of it.
Right.
But also with the whole globalization of products, capitalism is it's a system. It's not it's not made to protect us. The whole goal of capitalism as a theory is more capital. And so people like look at it and go, well, it shouldn't be, consuming us. Well, it's like, no. You're the one who lines up to the meat grinder and walks through it because of our monkey brain. And it's like, we could control that game in a healthy way if we had the right relationships, but we're so unhealthy. We touched on this before when you and I are chatting, is I've heard it said that if we were all emotionally stable, like economies would just collapse around the world.
Because we sell so much on fear and scarcity and greed, because you're right. We're battling the firmware of our brains, which are wired for the basic programming of eat, don't get eaten, and do anything to pass on your genes, to the next generation.
Totally. So how do you look at that from a perspective of, capitalism, venture capital meets intentional planned community, and where do those lines cross? Meaning, do you think that in an intentionally planned, purposeful community, do people truly live in a harmonized, we live for today, we only make for today? Or do you think there's like occasionally these outsized aspirations of what if, and then they pursue those things, and how do you scale those? So I guess my question is, in a healthy community, does venture capital disappear because there's no great innovation, because people are like no longer insecure and neurotic, or is there a way to like healthily share beautiful projects and products to the world that still maybe make abundance, but share more generously or intentionally? So what are your thoughts on that?
Great question. I tend to like to look at first principles, and a lot of that stems from the business models and the structures, because I don't think humans or capitalists or business people are malicious by design. We just kind of maximize the game rules that we're handed. And then a lot of times we don't actually ask, why is this game rule versus that? Our current game rules of how we have capitalism today is very consumptive, production-oriented, monotonically defined as profit per share. assumption of growth infinitely up and to the right as much as possible on a quarterly cadence, a cap table that is all about shareholder capitalism to probably just a handful of folks, right? And so when you look at how that's set up, it's kind of this scenario which I think has reached its breaking point and end state. And so we just have to revisit those game rules. What if it's stakeholder capitalism instead of just shareholder capitalism? And stakeholders are everybody in the ecosystem that's affected by this business. Today, business is only defined by shareholders in the sense of like investors, employees, and they only think about customers, maybe some partners. But what about nature? What about the communities they operate in? What about the cities, the broader populations? Companies don't operate in a vacuum, right? Secondly, this quarterly cadence of how we look at things has created activist shareholders working at a short pace, management teams that are only rewarded for the short-term incentive, don't have the ability to even do longer-term planning. We've got stock markets that are a giant algorithmic split-second casino of all types. All these things have kind of been put in place that people are playing that game on. But what if we could just play a better game? And oh, Nick, I want to share an anecdote.
Please.
I ran this experiment. Take some people, play the board game Monopoly, and you play 30 minutes of it by regular rules, and then you stop and then say, how do you guys feel? And usually people say, this feels shitty. One person's pulling ahead. I don't even want to play anymore. And it's, okay, let's try round 2. Now, I just changed the game rule. Instead, you're trying to make everybody as wealthy as possible. How do we have everybody have as much money? And then, you can give money and this sort of thing. And so it's like, how do we have a collective win? And then play that for 30 minutes or an hour and see how people feel. And they usually feel like, oh, this is fun. We're helping each other. And then round 3 is, all right, let's do round 2 again. But now each turn, somebody can propose a new rule to accelerate how we all win, as opposed to one person getting the maximum.
So awesome.
You know what I mean? So it's like, that's what I was thinking about as an example of changing game rules for a different win condition.
No, I love that for so many reasons. I mean, you and I have spent hours talking about, instead of even trying to change the rules, necessarily, do we even look at what's the different game and how are products created in a different way? Do you remember that company Quirky?
Yes, I do.
That was one of those efforts where it was like, we're trying, and look, I never know the story behind a company of why they fail, why they win. And sometimes why they fail is, it's, they should have won, but it was market or it was something else. You never know. But there was something cool about Quirky where they're like, we're going to try and just crowdsource, people's crazy ideas. And then Bill Gross with Idea Lab, where he was trying to do that one that was same thing where people contribute ideas. And it feels like there's some, heroes who've been holding on for a long time, trying to figure out how to do this kind of thinking. And I personally am fascinated that you are a venture capitalist who grew up in split family, kind of Asian American, trying to understand punk rock meets Mandarin, and now are trying to harmonize, in a lot of ways, harmonize capitalism to play a new game and a new game theory. And when you think abundance, because what you're mentioning is it's abundance mentality, right?
Yeah.
It's a belief that there's enough. And we all have hardwired rules in our heads that we have to change because of our childhood, what our parents said, what we were taught in school, what we saw in movies, TV, whatever. Really weird question, but let's pretend, at scale, these little, intentionally planned communities of curiosity start to scale.
Yeah.
How many generations till we get the toothpaste back in the tube, or we decide we're going to make a whole new version of toothpaste? How far out do you think it gets to where there's a correction in this rebirth? Is it 5 years, 20?
I wonder if it maybe depend on the scale or the pace of collapse, because we are in the midst of collapse right now. COVID's speeding this way up. Wait till more climate collapse change kicks in. But we're seeing so many people, more than me, at a much deeper, bigger level, doing more regenerative communities, doing compounds with regenerative agriculture, and building these communities in rural nature settings, but also like the things you're doing, this urban composting, reinvent defunct big box retail, take that Best Buy that's gone belly up and make it something that's like a urban maker center. It's also co-living, and you've got the parking lot that's now a food forest garden, right? So that we'll do this reinvention at all those scales. And I think what's happening now will accelerate that pace. And my hope is to assemble and connect lots of these folks building these communities, and we share playbooks, make it like open source, make it like GitHub, like the governance models, the ownership models, the incentives. Maybe there's things we can do with blockchain or open repositories like GitHub style kind of, code bases, right? So I've even heard of maybe the need for an accelerator of communities,
I couldn't agree more. I think when you think about this at scale, what's funny to me is with little children, what do we do? They have like really intentional community. It's very structured. There's clear rules of how to play the game.
Yeah.
Be nice, go to bed at this time, like don't eat those like 900 cookies. And then we get into this weird phase where it's like post-college. Because like college, you start to loosen the rules up and it's like, yeah, just go explore. And like occasionally people go off the rails. And then they graduate and it's like, here's a boatload of debt you got stuck with.
Yeah.
Go get a shitty box that you're going to live in and like maybe find a partner, get a dog, whatever. And now you're lonely as hell and you don't have friends that you hang out with to eat meals anymore. Cause that would be weird, guys. That would be weird. You did that in your 20s and as a little kid, but like not now. Don't ever hang out with family. And then the only other time people rebuild that kind of intentional community, check this out. It's when either they become super stupid wealthy, then they build a commune and they bring their family back together and they all live with like this harmonious thing and create rules again. There's usually a benefactor that does that. And you've seen it with the Hearsts, you've seen it with the Rockefellers, you've seen it with every mega wealthy family. And then you do it when you're about to die and we shove people in homes where then they get to sing songs again and like like what are we doing? Like, and I get we want to be careful, but it's like because a few weird experiences happen around intentional community, it's everyone's like, oh, kill the whole thing because it's got to be evil. And it's like, well, that's kind of crazy. So
and the thing is, people have been doing it for people have been trying these experiments for generations under different models. There have been communes, there have been as I've been learning about this space, getting directories of these, so many different flavors with different principles and values, and there's learnings from each.
Kibbutzes, even like you look in the Middle East, like, I mean, that's not uncommon. I stayed in kibbutzes when I was in Israel on the Dead Sea, and it's like, that's normal. And like people hang out together, they eat together, there's a giant cafeteria, the food's killer. Like shared resources, and no one's doing weird things with each other's wives. Like it's okay.
Right. And there's all these different models, and it'd be really fun if a lot of like the hackathons or conferences or meetups were about community and people sharing ideas on how to make community really work, right? I know there are some out there, but that might be the big topic for the next time.
Or let's flip it. You ready for this one? Because this is what our work is all about. What if we turn the communities that are already defined into the accelerators and incubators to where like you take the people who are outside of the game right now and feel like crap about life. And you're like, no, you're a 24-hour day, 7-day a week, 365-day a year incubator. And you as a bunch of nerds, like, let's not just go to a pub and scream at each other and drink and yell at a TV. Like, let's go to a pub and pitch ideas or debate with each other. Like, there's so much out there
that's what you're doing, with the coffee and concepts. Like I see you as helping revitalize small town America for that. Mutual aid networks, co-creation, all those sorts of things. Just put that spark, that innovation, that creativity, helping each other out.
When it's you look at the self-help market, man, like as weird as it sounds, where we're dumping money into these things where it's trying to create happiness and productivity for people. Really what it comes down to is it's like, why don't they have authentic relationships? So we keep trying to sell books that teach relationship, and we keep trying to like satiate these things that are found through authentic, connection. But it's just silly to me. Let me ask a question. You and I have chatted about this. So we've got the kings and queens of capitalism, right? Like we've got the people who won the game, hard stop. A couple of weeks ago, they were in the Beltway sitting around being interviewed by, all the congressmen and Senate going like, tell me more about why you're not a monopoly that's ruining the world. And it's not just here, right? There's other private companies around the world that they run the game. You talked about this collapse. Do you think, and I think there's two ways to get to a more beautiful world, right? There's one where it's like it implodes and eats itself. And then there's another one where it's like we try and find a way to harmonize these giants to work with all of these little communities and, science fairs and senior care centers and, mid-career folks who are stuck, that they become an IP engine to play with the big guys in an ethical way where you kind of harmonize their R&D and CSR dollars to where it's like, do you remember the Dr. Seuss book, Horton Hears a Who?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
I still think that's one of the greatest economic books of all time.
For sure.
Where it's like when everyone has a voice together and they're saying the same thing, they can be heard. So like, do you see it as the only way out is it's too hard to harmonize it and the big players don't give a damn? Or do you think there is a way, and it has to collapse? Or do you think there is a way to start to like watch missional capitalism?
Man, I like to work. I'm trying my best to help and work on the latter. But there's a lot of history and trends that humans, we don't work that way. We need massive collapse, or inequality reaches a point where civil war pops up, and then just that's very possible too. I'd like to also think maybe there's a top-down way. Maybe one of these folks has a consciousness, whatever, psychedelic awakening, where it gets to download and be like, I should be serving, and let's invert the model, and let's revisit the game book, and I've got enough money, and that's one theory I hear too, and that's also classic. Wait till you win all the money on the game board, then you become a philanthropist, and so you can put your name on.
Then you control it,
right? Then you control it. But and that's the thing. Even in what limited work I've done in impact and philanthropy, there's a lot of ego tied up with that. Whose name, whose attribution, that sort of stuff. As opposed to, I think the most baller thing in the world: go make your 7, 8, 9-figure donation anonymously.
Yep. No, and that gets into even some of the game theory around like what should we do with abundance, and how to reconfigure it to where more of the company plays in the abundance earlier, and more of the community that helps co-create the user base. Because you think about, some people talk about, well, data is the new oil. How do we, share in the upside that's being made on people? And I'm all for trying to figure out how do we harmonize that, because strip mining the psyche of humanity and making a boatload of profit off people's insecurities and emotional instabilities is a pretty shitty way forward for us as a human race.
It is. It is. I love that you said that, strip mining the psyche. I've heard it phrased as cognitive strip mining. Typically empires are built on the back of strip mining resources and some sort of slave class. And this time around, in this information age, we are strip mining the collective psyche and consciousness and attention, and we have become our own slave class, clicking and retweeting and liking and all that sort of addiction we've engineered ourselves into, because the business model of free plus ad based means you must addict your users to make it fly. It's a real conundrum that we have. But to your point, I think the way out is, maybe we don't chase unicorns so much. So much of Silicon Valley venture capital funds, LPs, were all based on unicorn chasing. And the problem is that's like always going for the lottery outcome. Most businesses just aren't designed for that and shouldn't be. There's another saying, which is, let's foster zebras, not unicorns. Zebras probably have cash flow, organic revenue from the start. They're not meant to be multi-billion-dollar, swing for the fences plays. And they could be funded through co-ops, communities, pollinator models, capped returns loans, all sorts of things. So again, back to models. We need a bigger compendium of alternative models than just the one that's valorized that we know.
I agree.
You know what I mean? No.
I agree. Well, and so two things to that I want to explore with you a little bit. One's more of a comment on the zebras thing. So our logo is this triangle with like a wolf in it, and it's like geometric shaped. Yeah. We have this statement where we say is wolves, not unicorns. And the whole thing is, when people hear wolf, they think like negative, like, it's plunderous. And it's like, no, study wolves. Like, they run in a pack.
Yep.
They're lean. They share in the kill together. They take down bigger projects together. They're playful. They have a role to play. They're multi-generational, and they respect the elders, but they also give to the young and mentor them up. And like, there's all this fascinating stuff about wolves that I like. The zebra thing, it sounds fun, but like, man, I'm sold on, like, we need wolf companies. We need communities to think more like wolves, to where it's like, let's help each other out and move quicker as a pack. And I think if every little city saw itself as like this wolf pack,
Yeah.
together taking on a certain industry, that
Mm-hmm.
starts to fascinate me to where, you think about a dystopian future of AI wipes out a lot of jobs. It's like, well, what are the people going to do?
Yeah.
What do people have as their special superpower? Creativity,
Creativity.
nonsense, like
Yeah.
flat
Play.
nonsense.
Play.
And yes, and play and nonsense is that place where if you can get different people to mash up together with play and nonsense with some guidelines and rules,
Mm-hmm.
magic
Construction.
pops out. Oh my
Sure.
gosh, magic pops out of that. And that's where I think you program innovation and curiosity and lifelong learning as a social activity around IP for industries, and
Yeah.
you make that the new thing the wolves chase together. And this is, we've talked about new models for like, how do we do the economics of it. I want to share this idea, and I want to hear
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts, because
Yeah.
you play in the VC and the R&D space.
Mm-hmm.
I am fascinated with this idea.
Yeah.
That can you take a geography,
Yeah.
and can you take a part of federal R&D dollars along with private R&D dollars, match those, and turn it into a trust that sits on top of a community that people can apply for these
Mm-hmm.
curiosity grants
Mm-hmm.
out of a trust, and the trust can hold equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it can give like free grants, but then also you start your IP creation, and maybe it's art, maybe it's just learning a new skill around that vertical, or maybe you've got something you think is valuable, and if you get to a certain point of value inflection, you need more capital, go to a VC, go to an angel, go to a bank, or go back to the trust. And the trust, it holds equity by kicking out like a loan and or debt, and the terms are set by the other shareholders of the trust, the community.
Yeah.
But
That's
it's
interesting. Yeah.
but the money is being filled up by
Yep.
three paths,
Mm-hmm.
or four paths actually.
Mm-hmm.
One is federal R&D dollars, two is corporate R&D, three is it's being filled up with equity, and
Yeah.
then that's paid out in cash, and the fourth is being paid in by founders who gift back some ownership to the trust.
Yeah.
And I think every shareholder should get like a distribution out of it. And you hear that all ships rise, but it's like, but do they? Like when you think about corporate R&D, do you ever see a day that big R&D, because a lot of times big R&D comes after really cool startups, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're fully baked.
Yeah.
Do you ever see a day that big R&D would take a flyer on a startup that's like, it's super promising, but it's not to technology readiness level, and like, 50 million users? It's like, oh my gosh, this is really cool, and it's not an acqui-hire anymore.
Yeah,
Like,
I've seen it where sometimes corporate R&D turns into corporate strategic funds, and they are doing seed deals. They're farming out R&D and doing kind of pollination experiments in some ways, with the goal of
yeah.
learning and maybe acquiring or joint venture down the road. But I like where you're going with this. It's made me think a lot about, what if the antidote in some of these things is we get away from JP Morgan Chase and go back to hyperlocal credit unions, co-ops, what banks used to be in the small town. What if we flip it further? What if it's a nonprofit structure on top with kind of revenue lines beneath that? I'm really curious, what could we get with hybrid structures if we remove this shareholder concentration at the top and have a different structure? Could we have different game rules?
Right. And I think when you marry it with the corporate social responsibility that big brands already have, right? Like they're reinvesting, because look, I think what's going on right now with the world of all these political fracturings, it's actually Occupy 2.0.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's taking on a different face and name possibly, but Occupy 1.0 was just, look, there were some people who were, jumping on the bandwagon, but authentically, there's a lot of people going, the game hurts. Like, how do we play a better game? And what have we gotten out of from Occupy 1.0? I think a lot of people trying to innovate, but at scale, we haven't seen a fundamental change in the system. And I think this accelerated crash, as you're describing it, of, there's some destabilization of education, capitalism, of politics. And I don't think we've seen the worst of it yet. I think more is coming.
Oh, like, yeah, this is just the start. Yeah.
What's it like in the Bay right now around that in particular? Kind of like, what does it feel like in San Francisco area right now?
People are leaving by the droves, because if you think about it, what if COVID's here to stay for another year or two? Maybe the business model of cities is obviated, because why are you in a city? All the fancy bars and the restaurants and the density and everything. And if that no longer holds, why would you be there? Especially how expensive it is, how unsafe and nasty San Francisco has started to feel the last few years. Hence, meteoric rise in on inventory there and real estate, and people flocking to the peninsula, to East Bay, to Marin, where real estate's exploding.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, what's funny is a really fantastic author, New York Times bestselling author from Marin, just moved up to Coeur d'Alene.
Nice.
And we're seeing more and more of that, of people from all sorts of spots. And what's interesting, you mentioned it, right? They're not moving to Manhattan.
Right.
They're not, you know, Joe Rogan's moving to Austin from LA, right? That's like small town for him. But you see, or like somewhere in Texas, that's what he's saying right now, I think. But like, they're not moving to the Austins, the LAs, the Manhattans, the Miamis, the normal moves. They're looking at these tier two kind of communities going, huh, I wonder, I could still get my Amazon delivered in like a day. Like, what might it be like here? And I think education will be an interesting one too. Like, what comes out of this for like the creative play there for kids and families, and how they involved in education. Man,
that's right. We could see a return to small towns, especially that have epic nature around them, because if you don't have the pressure to have to show up at the office and can be productive and work remotely, then work from anywhere would probably move more towards beautiful settings like at Coeur d'Alene, right?
Agree.
Yeah.
Do you think, so I had a crazy thought the other day, I have to say it. Do you think there's a number that a city breaks? Like just a population number, like geography, just basic math, space plus X number of people means this shit's going to break at some point in the future. Like, I think there's probably a number.
Essentially so. I mean, hey, I'll just say, I think Earth is over its carrying capacity. We probably have, like, I don't know, 2x more humans than we're supposed to.
Right. And like, that's a whole conundrum of what do we do to solve that problem? Like, we're looking at other planets, like, but when you fly over, here's the funny thing too. I question, I get that, but I also question, is it that we have too many people, or is it the people that we have are too soft? And that we're not willing to be pioneers. We're not willing to like build our own infrastructure. We're kind of soft, and we just want it given to us. So we're like, we want to go where the jobs are. And it's like, people are trying to catch cities at the right wave where it's like, oh, it's cool and hip. And they usually catch it when it's on like the end of the curl, and it just foams out. And they're like, wait, what happened? And then it's like this constant migration looking for the next wave versus going, no. We're going to make our own waves. And you fly over this country, and I get water's an issue. Like, we got to figure that out in a big way. But I do ponder, you look at, you know, First Nations.
Yeah.
And they had the band, they had the tribe, they had sizes that like worked for community. And, you know, we know numbers. I think Gore-Tex is one of the, you know, the infamous case studies of how many people on a campus. I think it's like 150. You know, I do think there's got to be a real number out there that it's like, okay, this much of a geography can be ruled effectively with a city council and a mayor. And at some point, that's stupid to run it that way if we have disengaged citizens. And I think we abdicate responsibility to these people because we're in these geographies where we're like, well, they got it, don't worry about it. And it's like, no. We need everyone playing the game. We have to.
There's an interesting tension because there's a lot of urban design theory which says you get efficiencies and scale and all these benefits from density, which pushes the notion of like before COVID, we were supposed to end up with like 5 megalopolises, right? And then you'd have operating efficiencies and really good centralized grids. But what if COVID is nature's response saying, actually, you should probably decentralize and go back to hyperlocal, more in connection with community at smaller scale, in touch with nature and resiliency. And so that shifts away from central grid, back decentralized, self-resiliency, self-reliance. And that's sort of the lesson I've been taking. You know, my dream now is to be a farmer. You know, I'm like going to get permaculture certified and understand how permaculture design principles apply maybe towards community planning and land layout and all that stuff. But that's at least that's the memo I've been getting.
You're going to be one of the weirdest, coolest venture capitalists in the whole world. Like, you're going to have like a straw hat, big piece of straw out of the mouth, overalls coming to the office, like great farmer's tan. And I'm such a big believer that your humanity, you know, I mean this in a very, you know, 1 second. I mean this in a very human way. You fascinate me because you're wrestling with the right questions, but you're putting your money where your mouth is, Tim. And we need more of that in this world right now, especially with people who like to use Burning Man as a tourism spot, not a transformational moment, that they then give lip service to. Well, that was neat. We should. And it's like, no. If you should, do it, and you're doing it, and it means, it gives me a lot of hope in a lot of ways. So I'm grateful for you.
Thank you. I think, the thing I wrestle with too is this comes from 20 years of, privilege and luck. I get to do this because I worked 20 years and had some modicum of success. How do we redo? So I hope I can be a steward of this and create some kind of working model that can go open source and be able to then change the game rules, create more of these, kind of like sandboxes for others that don't have to wait till they, quote unquote, hit their financial escape velocity number to start doing this. Can we have it earlier in the cycle? Can we be more inclusive? There's, the thing with the big population thing, so many of those people are disadvantaged and in poverty. And so that's the bit I'm really wrestling with, is how do we have more both liberty and justice? And this is a constant tension point in America right now. Left-wing folks want justice. Nobody should be left behind. Right-wingers want liberty. Don't take away my rights. Give me that freedom. And they both are often informed by trauma. And when they're matched with a sense of entitlement, they get weaponized. And that's what's happening in the country today.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And we have to have liberty and justice for just a few people, right? Like, that's the plan. That's what America was founded on, right? Liberty and justice for a handful. No, we need it for all. And you're spot on. And I think I'm intrigued. I think the answer lies, by the way, this is kind of sidebar. I think it's experience, like with what you're running, with what Innovation Collective is doing, with what other, states, weirdly, like, we're partnering with governments now that are bringing us in to rebuild their economies. And our method's very grassroots, very community driven, but it's got the big IP play. I think it's got to be these crazy experiments that are pushing the edge, like with what you're doing, married with policy. And I'm convinced that at some point there's a reckoning coming. And I think it's part of what's happening right now with, COVID being a fog that rolled in and let some of the big industries, do things they've been wanting to do, right?
Yeah.
That would have been viewed as unethical. Airlines killed off a bunch of like legs they didn't want. Yeah. And they did it in COVID. And they're like, COVID. It's like, no. They've wanted to get rid of them forever, right? Yeah. And I almost think as that happens, as we see accelerated job loss, as we see people like Yang calling for UBI, and it gets more and more traction, we're going to be forced to question, how do we rethink a model that takes the pre-existing dollars we spend currently on social infrastructure in our country, that we spend a lot on?
Yeah.
Colleges, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, just the R&D money that goes into these big institutions. And like all of this bloat that we then have administrative costs on top of it, there's got to be a way to reconfigure that with private R&D dollars, and then the excess we'd tax for UBI, and marry it into something where it's like, I almost see these Starfleet academies of multi-generational people, like all living and making together and creating. It's like this energy where it's around an industry. And it's like, that to me answers, how do you get the poorest of poor and the richest of rich to the same table, where you're always there learning and making. And I have some theories on how do you redesign university to wipe out, K-12 and college, and get rid of these false, false positives, right? Like, cause we do have these false finish lines of, I graduated high school. That's not a finish line. Graduate college. Not at all. No, that's fascinating. So when, I guess two things, kind of as we kind of get ready to wrap up. Two questions. One, where can people kind of find your work of VC meets Farmer Tim? Like, is there a space online or a best way to contact you? How do you like people to engage with you?
I have some podcasts here and there. I think if you search for me on Spotify, there might be a smattering there.
Perfect.
And then, the website mayfield.com. A lot of our work is there.
Awesome.
I'm on LinkedIn. I just made the decision today to actually maybe go off social media. Actually deleted my Instagram account, and might do the same with Facebook. I just want to see what it's like to not be like that, and try that. So it'll be interesting. Also, but yeah, so Mayfield.com has a lot of work there. And then I think something I want to highlight is what's special at you, Nick, and what I'm hoping to learn from and do is how do we use our platforms and privilege to spotlight and empower others. There's
Yeah.
been a lot of talk about we need diversity and inclusion ever since George Floyd, the BLM movement, but a lot of it's performative. All right, we're going to take this junior analyst and elevate her
Yep.
to partner, but she doesn't actually have decision-making authority. And so you really know when you're doing it right if you're elevating folks who have skin in the game, but also authority and decision-making power. So I think that's one of the things that we should try to do. And I'm trying to be really sensitive to this because I don't want to be tech bro gets calling to return to nature, goes back with prescriptive, here's how we hyperscale this formula. And so I've been reading this wonderful book called One Straw Revolution, which was the inspiration for permaculture. And it just, the whole lesson is just like, shut the hell up, observe, listen, and study nature and other systems that already know how to work. Before you go in with your prescriptive, I'm going to do this here, put that here, hyperscale that, like observe and study. And nature is such a great inspiration because like ecosystems are already interdependent and have all of these like nuances which maybe are a better model for how economies work than the monotonic equations that a lot of economists come up with,
Yep. And I think when I hear you talk, it makes me think about 3 words, be patient, be curious, and be bold.
Yeah.
And I think in that, even when you're dealing with people, because I think humans are nature, right? If you're actually patient and curious and bold, you can cut through all the crap when society is doing really harmful things to itself and to each other. But you have to be patient, because if you don't watch it long enough, you're going to leave with the wrong perspective. But if you watch it long enough, and if you're curious enough, and if you're bold to ask the right questions, you'll start to find answers that let you see it as a tree that's sucking up the wrong water, and it's a hurt tree.
Right. Yeah.
And you're saying something really beautiful there, because I've said it when people are like, well, can your model work in a community of 3,000 people? And it's like, well, yeah. Like we've done it in Shenzhen, we've done it in France, we've done it in Canada, 80 different communities across the US that I've been in. And it's like, the one thing I've learned is like, you get different results at different scales, but a human's a human is a human. And like, we all want to make things of beauty and value, and we're angsty as hell if we don't have friends we get to do that with. And we just get nasty.
Yeah.
And it's like that's society in a whole. If we can unlock the pathway for true expression of beauty and value to be realized in the world, we heal a lot of things really fast. And it's obesity, it's depression, it's suicide, it's homelessness. We start to like wrap our arms around like the toxicity of man, and you say, hey, it's cool. Like you have a path here. You're welcome here at the table with your crazy ideas, man. And can I share an anecdotal story?
Of course.
When we at our Coffee and Concepts, this is a great example of this. We host these across the country, and you know what they are, but I'll explain it for those who don't. Twice a month, we host these free coffees. People come in, they say their name, they say what tech news interests them in the last 2 weeks, because it's a way they can express a new version of themselves. And then we say, hey, who's got a concept they're working on they need help with, right? So everyone is seen, everyone's passions are expressed. It's like a human RSS feed. And then the curiosities are let out, and there's no business plans, no pitches, no decks. It's like real time. Let's build companies together and give first. So it's modeling a lot of what we talked about. And, what I love is we train all of our staff to do this, because they're the facilitators of these most often, is when someone raises their hand, like, I've invented this, and it's total crackpot shit, man. And they just full on say it. And what we've told people is like, take them at their word. Like maybe they did. Like, wouldn't you be a jerk if they invented like a cloak that can stop bullets on the fly, and it's invisible? And if they've got that, like, bang-a-rang, like, let's go take that to like, the next, major. Northrop Grumman needs to know about this now. Like, let's pay $1 billion. But it's fun because I've watched, like, one time someone shared they had something like that, and our facilitator goes, oh, That's incredible, and it works. And like, oh yeah, like, you probably should be careful how you test it. And like the group starts to like wrap around this person. It's like, basically don't shoot yourself for anybody else. But like, wasn't saying it's not real, wasn't saying you're dumb, wasn't saying this is stupid. And sometimes people just need a safe space to
Yeah.
express things that are crazy. And here's the truth. What did that hurt? Like, everyone moved on. And in that same room, there were other companies that were formed that day that have gone on to be worth lots of money. And it's like,
That's
it's
right.
super
That's so great.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that
Okay.
little pod, that safe space, right? It's that,
Yeah.
like, back to, like, do you remember when you were a kid and show and tell was like one of the best things in the class? So.
Oh my God, that's what we're doing, Tim.
Yeah.
That's what you're building. You're building like a show and tell space for everyone to come and eat and hang out and share
Yeah.
stories. And I love this.
Well, I hope
And
future
when
sessions will highlight, some of the innovators that you spot from this, and we'll platform them and let them tell their stories, and it'll be really great inspiration.
100%. And
Yeah.
my question was, when roughly, if you could feel the weather, when will people see like Tim's first crop growing on your new land you're buying? Like, when are people
Man.
going to come have a feast? Is this a year out, 2 years? Because you're closing on it soon. But like,
Yeah, it's going to take some work, and I need to live on the land and learn it, kind
okay,
of ask it what it wants to be. But, there's definitely garden space already on it. So probably
cool.
could be within a year, so
I love it. I want
yeah,
an invite to the first feast.
sure thing. Of course. Yeah, it'd be wonderful. Would love to have you there. Just
Awesome.
give a talk and, do a dinner salon, all these things. Yeah,
I'd love it. I'd love it.
you
Tim,
got it.
thank you so much
Uh-huh.
for making time and sharing your thoughts. I think it's really important for people to wrestle with what you've
Yeah.
been wrestling with. And so I hope others listen to this and feel inspired. I hope venture
Mm,
capitalists, entrepreneurs, people who are living in the middle of nowhere who have no idea what tech is, I hope they're inspired by your struggle of harmonizing, reality around you. So thank you for doing that
Thank
work.
you. Appreciate it.